Happy Easter!
By the way, hello everyone, and welcome to Sunday, and welcome to Easter. And you're probably getting this late, so I will say happy belated Easter, which is something that I don't think has ever been said before, but I'm saying it to you now. But we're not going to talk about Easter today. We went over to my parents' house today, and we had a wonderful dinner. It was very, very good. But I'm actually going to be talking about D&D. And I'm talking about Dungeons & Dragons because yesterday we played, but more importantly, yesterday we finished our first campaign ever. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about that. We'll call the vlog Reflections on Our First D&D Campaign. How about that? And this is coming from my perspective, from the perspective of the DM. There was a lot of things I learned. I felt like I learned something every single session. There was a lot of times after a session was over that I looked back and I said, man, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that. And a lot of... You have to think fast. I feel like I'm pretty good at improv, but I feel like I've had to force myself to get even better at it, because you really don't know what your players are going to do. When you first read that starter set book, we played the starter set, Lost Mines of Phandelver. When you first read that, it's very invigorating and makes you feel excited as a DM because you're like, oh man, I can't wait to see what my players are going to do. And then at the same time, you kind of freak out because you're like, oh my god, what if my players don't do this stuff in the book? You know, in the book it describes a scenario or two for how players may decide to get through an obstacle. But there was quite a few times where, whenever we were playing, everyone threw me a curveball. And I feel like I was a little too strict in some respects. It kind of went both ways. There was a few times where at the end of a session I looked back and my players had been trying to push to do something, and the book had given, it said, well, this monster wants this to happen, right? So I was really trying to use words or whatever to kind of careen their talking and stuff to get to that specific thing, and sometimes they didn't get there. And I think I limited them in that way. I feel like, if they were trying to they had like a completely different idea as a group and they were pushing for something that I probably should have just went with it. And to give you an example, there's a part near the end of the campaign where they are dealing with a spectator, which is it's a beholder, basically. It's a lesser beholder. And the spectator is this ancient monster that has been summoned in this room, and he's chilling there, and he's been there for God knows how long, 50, 60 years. Everyone in the place is dead, but he's convinced that everyone's alive. And what the book wants you to do, what it wants the players to do, is to lie to the spectator and say, we work here too, and we've just come to let you know you're relieved of your duty. So then the spectator will disappear. They have to, obviously roll a deception check or whatever for that, but that's what it wants you to do. And my players actually had a completely different idea. Instead, they were talking about, they were making idle chit chat with the spectator, and they were talking about, there is no one here. They were trying to convince the spectator that no one was there. And in the book it said, the spectator believes that everything is running fine, but my players were pushing so hard for it that I kind of wish that I would have just let them roll some persuasion checks to do that. I think I actually did let Thomas roll a persuasion check and he just got really low. But they were pushing for it so hard, I should have probably just let them kind of push their way into that thing. Because they didn't think the other way around of you're relieved of duty, that kind of thing. So that's one example. Now on the flip side of that, there were some other times where I felt like I was way too lenient for how they dealt with situations. There were several times looking back where, I want them to have fun. That's a big thing for me, though. But at the same time, there's a few times where they handled situations where, enemies or bosses became pushovers. And, on one hand, everyone's having fun. But on the other hand, I felt like legitimately the first half of the adventure was not challenging whatsoever. Because whenever they came up with something, and if I thought it was fun and ridiculous and funny, I just kind of let them roll with it. Which is good to an extent, but I felt like I should have fought back a little bit more. And I did that in the second half. In the first half of the adventure, in the first 2 to 3 sessions, they walked all over me, which is okay, and they had fun. But I realized that they weren't having any challenge. They were walking through areas, talking their way through most things. And then on the second half of the adventure, I kind of had to ramp that up. And because of that, there was a lot of instances where I probably pushed them a little too far. We had a lot of near-death experiences. Actually, within the first 30 minutes of the session yesterday, Austin died. And it was not my intent to kill him, but I did. He had the lowest number of hit points of anyone in the group, and a wraith approached him, put his icy cold hands on him, and sucked out his soul. And we all rolled, and he died. And it caught him off guard, because he hasn't been here for the other sessions. He was just here for yesterday. And he was like, I'm dead? He's like, I'm unconscious? I'm like, no, you're dead. Because if a wraith gets you to 0, because he has a life drain attack, you actually just die. And it caught me off guard. And it was one of those things that, whenever it happened, in the back of my mind, I knew that the group had found one revive scroll, so they could at least bring him back. But it freaked me out because I've never actually killed anyone. That hasn't happened before. We've had some close calls, but the dice have always been on everyone's side. I think there was at least 2 or 3 other times in the session where people were making their 3rd death saving throw. And when they're doing that, in the back of my mind, I'm like, please pass. Please don't die. I don't want you to be dead. That's not my goal. But I think it's one of those things about finding a balance. In the first half of the adventure, I feel like I was a little too soft. In the second half of the adventure, there was a few times it was a little too hard. But did everyone have a good time? I honestly, legitimately think they did. I feel like I got better at improv because you have to. I feel like I'm pretty good at improv anyway, but I had to push myself to become better and do quick thinking. One of the things, and this isn't anything wrong with the books or anything like that, it's me, is that I wish I would have more time to study up on stuff. And I know on one hand you don't want to study too much because you want it to be a lot of improv, but there was a lot of times where I felt like the party was talking to someone and I kind of knew some bullet points for what they wanted and what their motivations for doing things were. But then I felt like I missed a lot of stuff. That if I just would have read over everything and kind of understood more of the story as a whole sometimes, that I would have done a better job at. Overall, it's been a learning experience. It really has. And then we've even changed things about the game as we have gone on. Like in the last session, I don't think I showed it yesterday, but we made initiative tents that I drape over the DM screen. Because up to this point, the players have never known initiative. I write it down, and it's on my side. I announce whose turn it is. But if they can see initiative, then they know their turns, which I think is really convenient for them. And it also allows them to do more tactical things because they know what's coming up. It's all just stuff to consider that I've been learning, piece by piece. Anyway, overall I have had a blast doing Dungeons & Dragons with everyone. It's been a lot of fun. The first campaign went really well. I wish that everyone had more regular schedules, that everyone could be there every time, but I understand that we're adults, we work, it's hard for everyone to do that. But we had fun. We had a lot of fun, and I think the next adventure is going to be even better. We worked on some character creation last night, and oh my god. It's going to be cool. Mao is going to be a druid, Thomas is going to be a bard, and William's going to be a barbarian. And then the most interesting character is probably Michael, who is going to be playing a devil-worshipping warlock who got tricked. He's not technically devil-worshipping. He got tricked by the devil into doing something. So now he's sold his soul to the devil, but he was tricked or something. But the most interesting part of that is that we're playing it where he's basically 2 characters. He's the same character, but he has some sort of bipolar split personality disorder thing where every time he rolls a 20, he immediately thinks he's someone else. And he's playing 2 characters. He's playing a drow, a dark elf, who is a warlock, but when he switches, he becomes a paladin. And I think that's hilarious. I think that's awesome. So he's basically this warlock who is, this chaotic evil guy, but he becomes a paladin. And I think Michael's still working on his backstory type thing, but it sounds like he's going to be kind of like the paladin's going to be after this evil drow warlock, but he doesn't know that that's him. He's going to be like investigating it, but he doesn't know that he's the guy. And every time he rolls a 20, he switches from one to the other. So yeah, he's still working on the details of that, but it sounds really interesting. And also, Warlocks seem really hard to play, because we were looking it up in the player's handbook to figure out all the stuff, and they are super complicated, but it'll be a funny character to work with. Anyway, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any D&D stories, maybe I know a lot of people have actually started playing D&D because we started playing D&D, which is cool. Let us know how your sessions have gone, or if you finished the campaign, let us know how that went. And that'll be it for today. I'm interested to hear your stories. As for us, tomorrow, Lindsay gets here. Lindsay's going to be here for about a week, and we'll be hanging out with her and doing stuff, and it should be a good time. As always, let's meet back tomorrow, shall we?